Hello everybody, this is Don. I'm going to give a synopsis of my backpacking trip along the Appalachian Trail. I'm going to be referring to some notes I've got over here so I won't forget anything. If you're not interested in the synopsis, just want to see the videos and pictures, just zip on through till you get to some other views. Anyway, my day started on November the 9th, 2017. I got up about 5 a.m., got dressed, got in my car, and drove up to a place called Deep Creek Gap. There's parking there where I left my car. It rained on me pretty well all the way up there, but started clearing up about the time I arrived around 3 p.m. It didn't rain after that while I was hiking, but the fog had moved in real heavy, and it was kind of spooky. Some people on the trail refer to it as being in a horror film, like you might see on some of these horror shows. Anyway, I arrived about 3 p.m. and I arrived at Plum Orchard Gap shelter, and that's where I spent the night, but I didn't stay in the shelter. I set up my tent, and it was a good thing I did because about 5:30, just before dark, a group of about 6 kids, I call them kids, they're in the 20s, I guess, and arrived, and they were through hikers that was finishing up the 2,000-mile hike, and they kind of took over the shelter, but that was okay. I enjoyed having them, and they were great conversation, and meet people from all over the place with all kind of backgrounds and ideas, and some of the kids, I think, were kind of partnered up, with the girls and the boys, and they probably go their separate ways after it's over, but right then they called themselves a trailomie. Instead of a family, they call them a trailomie, that they were a family as long as they were on the trail, and they hiked together for several hundred miles. And they were going to finish up, I think, tomorrow. They would have finished the 2,165 miles, or about that they had to hike. The next morning, I let them get up and get out because I didn't have a long hike planned, and I knew they would want to. And I didn't. Normally, it's easier to pack up and all by taking all your stuff to the shelter, so that's what I did. We went to bed about 9 that night, and they built a fire, which was really nice. On day 2, on November the 10th, I got up and around 7 a.m. and I started my hike around 9, and I had to hike 7.3 miles to a place called Muskrat Shelter. There was a place called Hiking Out of Bly Gap, which was very tough, and on that day I had to cover about 2,800 feet of elevation gain, which is what really whips me. And I arrived about 3:30 at the campsite. I set up my tent again, and I was glad it did. More people arrived, which is always a good thing, and they built a nice fire, and we sat by the fire, and it was a great hiking thing. On day 3 was November the 11th. I got out early because everybody was talking about rain coming in that night, and so I decided I better hit the trail early enough and get to the next shelter. I didn't plan to hike to that shelter. I planned to hike to a campsite where I'd set up my tent, but setting up your tent in the rain and the cold is not really something you look forward to. So I ended up hiking 12.5 miles that day to a place called Carter Gap Shelter. This took me over an area called Standing Indian Mountain, which is the most beautiful mountain I think I've ever seen. The elevation at the top of it is 5,478 feet, and I would highly recommend this hike to anybody who wants to do it. You can park down at a place called Deep Gap, and when you park there, you can hike up to the top of the mountain on a day hike and hike back down. But you do need some good legs because it is up, but it's a gradual incline. It's not terrible at all. I had company again that night, but I had already built a fire time they got there, so it was very nice. About 8:30 it started raining. It rained the rest of the night. It was one of the few times I slept in the shelter, and the rain sounded like acorns hitting it. It was so hard in that tin shelter, but it kept better than putting up your tent and taking it down in the rain. You slept very little, but we had good company. Just for a side note, there was a kid there. I had on tons of clothes, and he was in shorts and a t-shirt, and he just had a puffy jacket he put on. course, he didn't stay by the fire too late because he started getting cold, went and jumped in his sleeping bag. But he was claiming he was hiking 26 miles the next day, which I'm sure he could have done it, but I'm not sure. Anyway, but on day 4, the November the 12th, I left camp about 9 a.m. and I hiked to Carter Gap Shelter for 8.7 miles. I hiked all day in the rain and cold, and I was really miserable by the time I got to the hut. And a lot of other people was as miserable as I. There were some through campers, hikers there, and some day hikers, but we all stayed in the shelter. I mean, it was just miserable out there, and nobody attempted to start a fire. We ended up going over a fire tower that they call, let me see if I can see it, Albert Mountain. Now, Albert Mountain, it whipped my butt every which way, because climbing up Albert Mountain was truthfully climbing. I mean, you can't stand up, you crawling on rocks, climbing, and at the time I got to the top, I was whipped, but fortunately it was downhill the rest of the way, and the trail was really nice, and so I hiked that 8.7 miles without too much trouble, and got there about 3 o'clock, I think. I was freezing because you can't get your dry clothes wet, so whatever clothes you got on is wet from sweat because you got on a rain jacket, but you still sweat inside of it. And then when you stop, you might freeze to death, so you can't stop. So when I got there in the shelter, I stripped my clothes off, put on my dry clothes. By then I was shivering, so I jumped in my sleeping bag and warmed me right on up. There were 5 other hikers there, like I said, some through hikers and some day hikers. Well, on day 5, November the 13th, was my pickup day. It was the last day of hiking. I had a pickup time of 3 p.m., but I was able to get a text to the shuttle driver that he could pick me up at 11, but fortunately he came an hour early. I think he intended to hike down and meet me because he was had his hiking stick and all, like he was going to hike out, but I got there about 10, so I got there just as he was getting out of his car, so he took me back to my car about 11, and it was so early in the day I decided I was going to just tough it out and drive home instead of getting a hotel room. So that's what I did, and I got home about 5:30 and slept like a baby last night. Thanks for watching. Today is November the 17th. I'm up here at Dix Creek Gap. This is my first time, my last hike of the season. I'm going to try to hike about 35 miles if I don't get too cold tonight. It's supposed to get tomorrow night right at 30 degrees. It's quit raining, everything's cleared up. It's about 12 o'clock. I only have 4.5 miles to hike today, so I shouldn't have any trouble making that. The fog is really heavy, so that'll be an interesting part of the hike. And I'm headed out. I probably won't do any more videoing until in the morning, and then I'll show you my campsite. It's going to be an interesting. I'm a little bit chilly just sitting here, but once I start moving, I'll be fine. I'm about 2 miles into my hike. Most of the leaves have fallen off the trees. There's a few spots where you've got some views, but very few. The fog has set in, so I'm sure at this point I could have seen the mountains on the other side if it wasn't fogged in. But anyway, I'm taking a break. I'm about 2 miles in. There's the trail. It's covered with leaves. I have to be real careful. The leaves, when they're wet like this, are slick. But I haven't slipped. Yep, that's what it looks like. This is the trail, and I'm still on the slight incline. I've been climbing up for the last 30 minutes probably, and getting higher and higher into the cloud. I guess this is a cloud. I don't know if it's a cloud or if it's just fog, but it looks like fog to me. But it's hard to tell. But I am a little bit sweaty, which makes you a little bit cold. Then you got all this 100% humidity that won't let your clothes dry out. So we're going to see how it works out. Maybe it'll be okay. I hope so anyway. Well, I'm on the top of the mountain and my map says there's a beautiful view. Well, there might be if you love fog. But that's pretty well all I got is fog. Yep. Not much else, but I can see the trail good hiking, no problem. I've been hiking down for a pretty good bit and it's gotten a lot warmer. You wonder what kind of trees these are. They got regular looking leaves on them, but none of them have turned. The rest of the trees, the leaves have either turned or fell off. I'm out of the heavy fog anyway, and I don't feel so damp, and I've warmed up a little bit, like it's not quite as cold. Well, that's good. This is my campsite for night number 1. I just arrived. I got here a little earlier than I wanted to. The time is about 2:45. They've got a shelter here and a place you can hang your packs while you do stuff and eat. And they got a shelter here where you can get out of the rain and sleep if you need to. It looks like it'd be pretty comfortable. I might decide to do that tonight. If I get cold, I won't do it no more because I'm sure I'd be better off sleeping on the ground than I would in my tent, but we'll see who shows up. Last time I slept in one of those, I had a snore, and then the second time I had somebody who was having fits all night long and I didn't get any sleep. If about dark nobody shows up, I'll set up my tent there. I'm taking you down the trail to the Privy. Thought I'd take you on a tour. I may not have ever shown it before. But it's quite different. It's better than having to dig a hole. Can you see it right there? That's the toilet area. Toilet area, which you can have some privacy, and there's something to sit on. Let me walk on up, kind of show you how it works. And then there's a hole in the ground. That's it. Welcome to it's much better than squatting. My knees can't hardly take that squatting. But that's it. That's our setup, and there's the shelter. I'm going to go hang out a little bit because I'm awful early. But this is my tent setup for tonight. I decided I'd be warmer if I slept on the ground than in the shelter. I think I'd be warmer up against the ground anyway. It's supposed to get down to about 34 degrees tonight. I hope I got enough clothes and enough sleeping bag to keep me warm, but we'll find out here in a few hours. It won't get that cold until just before daylight in the morning, and if I wake up cold, then I know I need more, should have brought more stuff. Anyway, that's a home sweet home, and I kind of missed being on the trail. I really enjoyed being on the trail today. I was surprised that I missed it, but I've done enough of it that I'm looking forward to it. And I had a great time, but I only had about 4.5 miles to hike today, and it was fairly easy, so it wasn't a problem. And I got here way ahead of time, so I'm just goofing around. Well, it's the morning of day 2. It should have got down to about 34 degrees last night. It's quite chilly, especially when you're not in your sleeping bag. I fared fairly good last night. I didn't get really cold, but I worried about it most of the night, getting cold, but I didn't get cold, but you never know. I'll turn the camera around and let you see some of the campsite in the morning. Maybe I can turn this way, you can see the sun coming up behind me. Whoop. There's the sun, block it with a tree a little bit. Coming up behind me, watching the sunrise. And over here is the shelter. I didn't sleep in the shelter, I slept in my tent. And I'm packed up and ready to head out. I've climbed up a couple of miles into my hike. I got about 5.5 more miles to go. I'm at the top of a mountain and have a fairly good view. I'm afraid the sun's going to knock it out when I come by. I'll go by fast when it starts happening. Whoa. Got a little more up to go. There's the trail. Beautiful view, taking a break. This is on the view on some mountain after I left Black Gap. It's just about to kill me, this hike. I'm 2/3 dead. I got about a little over a mile to go before I hit my campground. But what a view. Well, this is the morning of day 3. This is the fire pit we had last night. There were some more people here. This is the shelter. I don't sleep in the shelter, but if I needed to, I would. I set up my campground over here. There's a bathroom up here. It's going to be a short video. Below 30 degrees. It's about 31 or 32. My bottle's water ain't frozen, so it must not be too awful cold, but my fingers are freezing, so I'm fixing to head out and hit the trail and see if I can't warm up.
Should go past this.
This is the view from the top of Standing Indian Mountain. This is the morning of day 4. It was real cold last night and it rained some of the night, but I slept in this shelter over here last night, so I didn't have any problems. Got a little bit cold at times, but not too bad. Survived it this morning. I got one more night to survive. And we are fogged in. There's nothing to see but fog. Maybe it'll burn off later in the day, but I doubt it. We had a little shower about 5 minutes ago, just a little sprinkle, but that was all. Today is day 5. I've only got a couple of miles to go to hike out. It's cleared up, I'm glad of that. Some pretty amazing views. There's still a lot of fog over the tops of the mountains, but it's clear right here. It's a great view. I'm about 2 miles out to be finished. It's been a great trip. A little colder than I would like, but I did okay. It's altogether different from the spring.